Hey, Steve, have you ever just gotten so frustrated with your life, things are not going well, and you just come to the logical conclusion of, screw it, I'm going to start making meth?
Every time I clock in for a shift, man, I gotta feel it every single time. It's just like, you could go into
Uh-huh.
work, deal with customers, or you could go to the back alley at the same location and deal with a different set of customers.
Same commute.
Same commute, same
Yeah.
time,
Yeah.
different profits, but understandable. Yeah.
Yeah, you'd be compensated very differently.
Yeah, exactly. Plus, my insurance probably wouldn't carry over, so the compensation would help.
Right, exactly. I know. I'm glad that you're saying that because I think about it daily as well. I can't be the only one. Um, I mean, and certainly, like from Breaking Bad, everybody knows that the lesson of Breaking Bad is you have to pay high school teachers more. And as
Exactly.
somebody who has worked as a high school teacher for like a decade, I can tell you that I've thought about that show often and said, I think Walter White is right. The only issue is I don't know how to make meth. I'm
Yeah.
terrible with chemistry, with
Hmm.
science in general. And if you want me to, like, I have 3 English degrees. If you want me to write a poem about meth, I could probably do that.
Yeah, I could film a really nice short documentary about math. Apart from that, when it comes to cooking it itself, we're gonna have to bring in the chemist for that.
Yeah, like, do you think we can become billionaires from that, from short documentaries and poetry about meth?
Well, what's more valuable to our society than short documentaries and poetry?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's what
Exactly.
everybody wants.
Yeah, that gets you high, but in a different way.
Exactly. It
You're
gets
just
you high on
high off of the
thoughts.
poetry, high off of the
Oh, I'm so
documentary.
high on this consciousness. Oh,
That's
I'm so
right.
aware of things.
That's right. Hello and welcome to Ignore the Bell. My name is Nathan, and this is the first time that I've got you on the podcast. My very good friend Steve.
Hi,
So,
guys.
Steve, would you mind giving just a little bit of a background about yourself?
Yes. Hi. My name is Steve. Known Nathan for definitely over 2 decades now, or
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
yeah, goodness. Okay, yeah, like 2 decades, and we go all the way back to old church camps and things like that. And yeah, studied film production. I did that in my CJEP level education, or what would be equivalent in the States to a junior college level education, and my university education as well, film production in Concordia, class of 2017. Woot woot. And yeah, I obsess about specifically sports documentary, but when it comes to just the art of filmmaking in general, I think, I consider, I adore, I lament that I don't have the same talent levels as the people I idolize. But yeah, I love film. It's really one of the things that I'm the most passionate about. And one of the things that took me away from class for 10 days in a row was this show when it came out. I'll run right before the last episode. I started watching the show about 10 days out before the finale, and I did not go to work. I did not go to school. I was hooked on the meth of Breaking Bad,
That's right.
100%.
Art can do that. It
Yeah,
really can. Yeah. All right. That's great. So I'm so happy having you on the podcast. I want to learn a little bit more about how you got into the show, but we're going to save that for after the sponsors here. So I'm hoping we're going to break this up into 5 different parts, right? Unless I'm getting mistaken. There's 5 seasons, right?
Oh yeah, 5 seasons.
Yeah. So I'm hoping that we can actually make 5 different podcasts on this. And what we're going to do today is we're going to focus in on season 1.
Hmm.
And before we get into season 1, then we do have a couple sponsors for the podcast.
Ooh,
So,
sponsors.
yeah, our first sponsor is Gray Matter Pharmaceuticals, a different kind of drug dealer. Listen, folks, you might be disparaging towards people who are on all kinds of opiates, on the street, and they're getting all that street level stuff. You don't want to bother with that. You want to go to the very best in pharmaceuticals. Gray Matter Pharmaceuticals, whether you're talking about fentanyl or any of these other, world-class pharmaceuticals, they are the absolute best at producing them. So make sure that, any kind of issue you have, whether you feel good, you should still be taking pills. Whether you feel bad, you should be taking pills. Whether you don't feel anything at all, you should be taking pills. Everyone should be doped up in some way, but don't get that street level stuff. You gotta go to the experts at Gray Matter Pharmaceuticals.
Gray Matter, yeah, great company, great sponsor. Honestly, I'm so
Yeah.
happy that they decided to sponsor this episode that I'm on. It's such a fan of their products
I
myself.
know, me too. Yeah, I told them before when I consulted with my doctor, I said, like, I feel perfectly fine. He's like, take more pills. I was like, okay, you're the boss.
It's like, damn right I am the boss of Grey Matters Pharmaceuticals.
That's right.
I'm all
And our
about
others,
profit margin.
that's right. It's all about the profit margin. And our other sponsor is Bogdan's Car Wash, featuring the best scrubbing tool in the world, Bogdan's Bushy Eyebrows. They provide powerful sudsing action and enough. They're soft enough, they're gentle enough not to scratch your paint.
Mm.
Yeah, they've got these great scrubbers. They're just in the exact same size and shape and color of those fantastic eyebrows that he's
Thick
got.
and bushy, something that really you can grip onto and get scrubbing.
That's right. Even on the rims, getting to the brake dust, all of that stuff, they can get into all those crevices of your car. They're really powerful things. So, Bogdan's Car Wash, visit today, whether you have a car or not.
Such great sponsors, such great products. I can't wait to get them all.
Yeah, me too. All right, folks, I hope you enjoy.
Oh man, I wish this discussion could go on forever.
Ignore the bell. We're gonna keep going, people.
All right, so we were talking Breaking Bad season 1. Now, I want to get your background on this of how you came to start watching the show, how you first heard about it. I want to share my experience first of all, though, because I think it's fun.
Oh yeah, please go first.
So, I started watching the show in, I think it was 2012, I want to say. I'm pretty sure it was 2012. And what happened was I was teaching a high school class. It was a grade 11 class, and it was I did not have the best group of kids in the room. And I'll be honest, folks, they were coming to class with some mind-altering substances pretty often.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and they kept telling me, Mr. Knapp, you have got to watch Breaking Bad. It is the best show ever. You would absolutely love it. And I'm like, okay. I'm not really trusting their judgment too much, but okay. Tell me what is the show about? And they're like, oh, it's this teacher who, gets cancer and he realizes that he needs money to take care of his family. But since high school teachers get paid like crap, then what he decides to do is he's going to start making meth, and he then joins up with his former high school student who's really into drugs, and they start doing that. And I just look at them kind of unblinking. Okay.
Yeah, that's
right?
a weird recommendation to come from a high school student. Yeah.
Especially ones that are maybe on something at the time.
Yeah, that's
I mean, at least I was an English teacher, so there was no expectation on their that I am going to somehow be able to help them build some kind of drug empire.
Okay.
But
yeah.
In any case, I was so skeptical. I'm like, there's no way. This is going to be a terrible show. I'm going to hate it. And for whatever reason, I started watching it, and I couldn't believe how good it was. And then I couldn't believe that the same group of students, that those guys and I had the same taste. And then I realized they're watching this, and they're identifying with Jesse Pinkman. And I'm watching this, and I'm identifying with Walter White. And you could not find two more different people. And I'm going, oh, this show, it cuts across those lines.
It works for everyone. It
does.
Brings people together, man.
That's right. That's right. So how did you start watching the show? Like, when did you first hear about it?
So you know what? I actually just remembered something about how I got into Breaking Bad, where I think it was maybe back in like 2010, 2011, before like the final season in 2013, where my friend had recommended to me like repeatedly, because I was already in film school at that point in time. So, a whole bunch of film school nerds talking about Breaking Bad. What's new? So they were recommending it to me, and I watched the first episode. And I remember thinking that the first episode was so boring. And I just did not enjoy the show. And I was like, you know what? I'll watch this some other time. And then it just didn't go away for another 2 years. And then by the time the final season was coming out, right before the final episode came out, like about 10 days before that, I decided to, give the second episode a shot and see what's going on. And then from there, I found myself for the next 10 days canceling life. I did not go to school. I did not go to work. I called in sick, and I just sat at home and watched Breaking Bad. And it was consuming. It took everything out of me. I did not leave my room. It was just me, Jesse, and Walt. And You know what? For a show about like meth, I was pretty damn addicted to it for
That's
about 10
right.
days. And
Yeah.
yeah, I kind of got to be a character in the world through my experience watching it as well. So a very wholesome experience the first time around. Breaking Bad is just like one of those things that um, I still don't understand what I did not find entertaining the first time around.
Right.
But by the time I came back around to it, an absolute masterpiece. Just a
Yeah.
genius level show.
It really is. It really is. That is an amazing story, though, that you just binged it. Like,
Yeah.
I've never heard of anyone else binging before.
Yeah.
That's so great.
It's honestly, I think the first thing I ever binged too. It was Breaking Bad. I just sat down and I was like, "This is my life now."
Right. That's amazing. I love that so much. That's a great way of getting into the show.
Yeah,
Uh,
amazing. Yeah, I love.
yeah. And it's one of those shows that the more I think about it, and every time I watch it, I just go, I'm finding new stuff, and I cannot get over how brilliant it is. Like almost
Yes.
every aspect of it, I'm completely marveled by.
Mhm.
It's really staggering.
And that's what I find so crazy about it too, is that like not only does it have that sense of something that is like masterfully crafted by the time that you get to the end of it, it's also finding out that they didn't have a plan that went that far ahead of time when they first started making the show too. Like down to that very common knowledge point about like Jesse supposedly he was intended to be killed off in the first season,
Right.
and they changed their mind just because they like the charisma of Aaron Paul himself. And honestly, it's things like that that you see in the show. It's a moment of lightning in a bottle. I don't think they could ever recreate something as
Yeah.
perfect as that. I have not watched it, but I've heard that Better Call Saul is great too.
You
And
haven't watched that at all?
no, I haven't. It's one of those things that are on my ever-growing to-do list of things to watch.
Interesting. So Tyler, he's got the weirdest approach to this. So he
Yeah.
has not watched Breaking Bad. His attitude is he's going to watch all of Better Call Saul, the prequel, before he watches Breaking Bad, no matter how long Better Call Saul goes on for. Like,
I feel so many different type of ways about that. There's a part of me that like applauds his courage and his bravery. That's an incredible choice.
it's a
The other
bold
part-
move.
It's a bold move. Let's keep the praise off for him. That's how I'm feeling out right now. It's yeah.
I don't get it because, I'm genuinely not spoiling anything in Better Call Saul, but there are jump cuts in terms of the chronology to it, and it definitely is. There's sequences that are taking place after Breaking Bad, so I feel like Tyler must watch this and be baffled at how Saul is like in this Cinnabon, in like the Midwest somewhere, just like okay, like
Yeah,
how
that
did he
must
get
be an incredibly, because like even that's what I was thinking too when I was revisiting the first season, was that like my memory of the show really starts around season 3.
Mm,
And I remember thinking that's like where the show got like crazy and it got intense, and that's where I started really like falling in love with the show. And like the run of the show that I remember the most is like 3 till the end. Um, but season 1 is incredible.
yeah,
Season 1 is insanely good. Season 1
yeah,
does so much groundwork in it. Like when you go back and you actually rewatch the series, like I am for the first time now, it's so it lays the groundwork of what this character is,
yes,
what he transforms, and like that whole thing they say about it's I can't remember, it's something, then decay, then transformation ends up becoming the whole through line of the show, and it's just
yes, you got it exactly.
it's
That
mind blowing.
it is. When I rewatch season 1, it is staggering just how everything's there.
Yeah,
It's like these late motifs of the series that just come back and come back and come back in deeper and more profound and more significant ways, and variations on that, like a really complex piece of music, right? If you're talking about like some kind of like symphony or something, where you hear stuff that you heard from the very beginning, and then it comes back, but it's like a slightly different variation of it. That's what the show does. So when they didn't actually have a master plan, that it wasn't perfectly plotted for 5 seasons, then you say, how did they end up getting this to fit so well together? It's staggering. It really is.
yeah. if I like have to speculate from my own perception, what I really think it is that they got into the position where they realized that this is a show that will have to end. Maybe once like they got to the end of season one and they were able to get those other seasons afterwards, they
Yeah.
realized like, oh, this is a show that needs to end. And
Right.
like they never wanted to make it run along. It wasn't gonna end up being for a painful comparison, Game of Thrones or anything like that.
Right,
That just
right.
goes on for a little bit too long and
Yeah.
doesn't really pay off. This show just hit the nail on the head. An absolute time bomb of work, and goodness, does that first season ever give you a lot to work with?
Right. And I'm glad that you brought up Game of Thrones because because obviously that has been just this monster thing
Yeah.
that people obsess over. And the difference though is that with Game of Thrones, and it's based off of the books by George R. R. Martin, A Song of Ice and Fire, but he's not finished writing the books. So
Yeah.
then the showrunners ended up in this position where they went faster than Martin did with the books. And even though he's heavily involved with the show, they're just like, and so
Yeah.
then they just kept going. But like another one that's really interesting is J.J. Abrams' show Lost. Have you watched
Yes.
Lost?
I have not watched Lost, but I am my film nerd self is very familiar with J.J. Abrams, and from what I've heard about how they used mystery box idea for Lost, it seems like something that I would not want to waste my time watching. So
Right.
I feel a lot of ways about that.
Yeah, and I get that. A lot of people do. Even people who have watched it and who have not watched it. As far as Lost, everybody, I remember this at the time, the fans were so concerned. They kept asking, like, the showrunners, do you have a plan? Do you know where this is going? And this was asked, I don't know how many times, and people were so scared. They're saying, you've like pulled at all of these threads, but are they all going to get resolved? Because you've now, like, it's just such a mess of a thing by
Yeah.
later seasons. And then it was just kind of like, no, not really.
You know what? Speaking
Go
of JJ at this moment in time as well, I was just wondering, Rise of Skywalker, how did you feel about all those threads coming together?
Oh, I did a whole podcast on it. I boycotted the movie personally.
You boycotted it.
Oh yeah,
Oh my goodness. You just didn't go see it.
I didn't go see it, and I still did a podcast on it. I'm not going to let my ignorance stop me from speaking about a subject.
Oh my goodness. Okay, that's an episode I definitely have to catch up on.
Yeah.
I want to see how right you might end up being about why you boycotted this movie.
Yeah, I really do think that I make very good points about it. I know what happens in it, and I basically, like, the short version of it is that I think that it maybe can work if you're looking at the 9 films as a whole, but ultimately what it does is it destroys the redemption arc of Anakin, which was really what the first 6 episodes were about. It was about redeeming him as a person. And if you're just going to bring back the Emperor, then it's like, so his death is meaningless then. And that was the entire point of those first 6 films. So you could say maybe it's worth it if you're looking at the overall 9, but if you just stop at 6 and you say, wow, that's beautiful, and like, and Luke was able to redeem Anakin, his father, through this, even when he's so far gone that you think he can't possibly come back from the brink, but Luke sees the good in him, and then, you know, ultimately Anakin does come back to the good side of the Force. You can see that with his Force Ghost thing, and then it's like, never mind, he didn't actually kill the Emperor. Womp womp. You're like,
yeah, you know what? You definitely don't need to see the movie. I'll tell you
Okay.
that. Yeah, you're good. You're good. If this is how you feel about it already, this movie will not help you in any way.
right,
Yeah,
that's what I think.
it's a bad experience.
Okay, is that how you feel? Is a bad experience?
You know what? I think when it comes to that, just to touch on that before we get back into everything
Yeah.
else, the Disney Star Wars movies, all of them, not a single one of them has made me feel like truly like this is Star Wars. Yes, but the one thing that they've all managed to pull off is to give you enough elements and moments that there's something that we all agree on is being cool, and also the parts that you hate about a movie might be something that someone else loves. And
Yes.
because of that, it becomes impossible to criticize them. So ultimately, they've made critic-proof movies that are not good at all. And that's what I'm noticing. It's just that none of these movies have left me with any real impact, but at the same time, it's just like they're not bad, but I'm definitely never like, oh, let's pop in The Last Jedi, or like, oh, can't wait to see Rise of Skywalker again, or oh, let's all get together and watch Solo.
Right.
Yeah, it's
Right.
it's a painful process. You know what?
Yeah.
You're a smart man, a very smart man.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I was so disappointed with the way they've been running the entire thing that I'm just like, because I know that every single time we spend money, we're voting with our wallets. No matter what we're spending money on, whatever you want to see more of in the world, spend money on that. Whatever you want to see less of in the world, boycott it. Don't spend your money on it. And I'm like, I don't want to see more of this stuff, so I'm not gonna go and see it. Like, I don't go to the movie theater all that often, but like Jordan Peele's film Us, I went to the theater to go and see that because I'm like, give me more of this. Yeah. And then everything that I don't see, less of that, please. So that's my attitude.
Smart man. So how about we go into episode 1?
Sure. Yeah, we can go episode by episode. Mm-hmm. I just wanted to give like a little bit of an overview with some of the themes, like because what you're seeing with this entire season is all of these themes that you ultimately get in the series. I think basically all of them get introduced. So we get Walt's pride, his ego. We get introduced to that. We get introduced to the theme of Walt actually being a great teacher. That like Jesse is like such a failed student that, you know, not only like is he just a terrible student in high school, but like Walt has failed him in multiple ways where he doesn't really care about him as a student. He sees, like, you know, he says on the comment that he leaves on one of his tests, which is something like apply yourself, like you can do better, right? Gosh. And that is Walt doing this again and again throughout the series. But you see this in season 1 that he takes Jesse, being Captain Cook, who is terrible at cooking meth. And then even when he doesn't get to Walt's level, boy, does he start teaching. And boy, does he start learning. You know what I mean? And so to see Walt actually being a great teacher, it's just, it turns out that in the high school lab, you know, Jesse's not a great student, but that doesn't mean that he's not bright. And that Walt is not a great teacher. So there's that. We get, and this is not so much a theme, but just one of the approaches that you get these different time jumps playing with narrative chronology. And I think that this show does a really good job of that. You really only get it within episodes within season 1. Like the first episode, then you have Walt recording on the camcorder, right? His confession and to his family and like the message to his family. And then it comes back to that by the end of the episode. And then you get that later on in, I think it's episode 6 where...
Gray Matter, that one?
No, the one where he blows up Tuco's office and then he's walking away. That the episode starts with that and he's bald in that. And he's walking away, and then the rest of the episode, he's got his hair, and then it comes back to how we got there. That you get these time jumps, and you ultimately get this later on with like the stuff falling from the sky into the pool. But true. That carries on for an entire season, right? Or maybe more than a season. I can't even.
For the things falling out of the sky, that's the entire season 2.
Yeah. That you get him taking on this persona of Heisenberg, who is very different from Walter White. And just those two people, Heisenberg versus Walter White, and to see that. So those are like the themes that I'm noticing as you go through this season. I don't know if you noticed any other themes that I haven't mentioned, because I wasn't...
There is that one very popular thing about the color yellow throughout the entire first season, where that's always a sign of danger and threat. It's like the yellow bag, the yellow plate, just the desert scape being yellow in the first place.
Right.
There's always that sort of sense of like whenever there's danger, you see some yellow, and it just lets you know that like, oh, it's about to go down. And for me, that sort of visual motif that they use is so like so subtle because I never noticed it. That's one thing that I got bagel through my first watch through. I didn't see it at all. But once I had it mentioned to me, I could never unsee anymore. Like every time I see yellow, I'm just like, oh goodness.
Exactly.
Absolutely love that. Also, that's the thing. When you're talking about Jesse being a bad student and like Walt being a good teacher, one thing that I definitely noticed in the first season is that it really takes the time to create that line between Walt and Jesse where it allows them to showcase their different expertises. Where like when it comes down to cooking, Walt knows how to cook. when it comes down to the business, Jesse knows the business. And like
Yeah.
that way it makes it for a really interesting dynamic where they both actually really, really, really need each other because Walt can't do this on his own and Jesse can't figure it out, especially in that one episode with what's his friend? Badger.
Badger.
They try
Yeah.
to cook in the desert together and then it's just terrible. And they end up like getting into a fight over it and all that. And just
Right.
like even then you could tell once again the impact of how good of a teacher that Walt is because Jesse finds himself in that teaching position to someone else, and then you could see how frustrated he gets with them. Especially,
Yes.
you could see that when it's on something that he's interested in, his brilliance shines because he's able
Exactly.
to tell, like, oh no, you're making this mistake, and you're making this mistake, and you're making this mistake, and you don't use this to cook. And it's like he suddenly becomes the teacher in the same way that, like, really showcases how much of an impact Walt has had on his life from when he was a teenager till now, him as an adult. And Walt's Pride. Now,
Yeah.
Walt's Pride is such a incredible thing throughout that first season because, like, everything there is. I think it's the episode that I love the most from the first season is episode 5, the Gray Matter one, because
Mhm.
that episode is arguably, if you're watching the season on its own, I do remember thinking this the first time I watched it as well, that episode was useless. And it
Right.
doesn't really do anything for you because, like,
Mhm.
why are you setting up this company? And then for like 4 other seasons, I don't even think about it. And then, like, oh, why are you doing this here? And like, why are you introducing Badger just to have a stupid friend character and things like that? All these little elements really come back. And the one element in it that is the most important, and I think that episode is where like Heisenberg really is born, even though you only see him in the following episode when he goes to meet with Tuco, and he actually like says Heisenberg for the first time. In that episode, you see Walt's pride, and that's why he needs that Heisenberg. It's like a sort of a different form of himself, like a sort of alter ego that is just his pure pride at work. And like
Yes.
when he refuses the check, when he refuses a job first, and then
Yes.
refuses a check at the end of the episode, the whole series could have ended right there.
Yeah.
If just accepts
Yeah.
a check, does the treatment, no longer needs to commit crimes, no longer needs to do every single other element that happens to him throughout the rest of the series. On that one episode, he chooses the path that allows him to become Heisenberg. And I find it
Right.
such an amazing episode because, like, once again, I think that's maybe one of the things that got actively retconned as they went along with the story. But, like, that episode itself is where you could just see Walt give up on his sort of his like logic and just decide that, like, no, for the first time in my life, I'm making all my decisions based on my pride. And just he's going with his pride, and that's what leads him down this whole path for the rest of the series.
Right. Okay. So I do want to go like through the episodes, but
Mhm.
can I put forth a theory that I have?
Please.
Okay. So I think, and especially rewatching season 1, because this ties into what you're talking about,
Yeah.
that Walt gets so angry at one point with Jesse because he sees him and he's using, right, that he's actually using the meth, right?
Yeah, the toilet scene, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
And where, yeah, he wants to throw it all out, right? And he's like, you know, like, you stupid junkie, right?
Yeah.
And all of this stuff.
Just kicking each other.
Right, exactly. And okay, so my theory is Walt says we don't use, like, you don't use
Mhm.
our product. Like, that just, you cannot be successful in this if you're smoking it. That
Mhm.
you're going to destroy this thing. Okay. Walt is getting high off of his own product. He really is. And if you watch, because if you're looking through season 1, he goes out of his mind. He becomes somebody else. Like, he is high when he first starts making meth, because in the first episode, you see him, he does this, he makes the meth, and then he comes back, and then what does he do? He becomes some animal in the bedroom with Skylar.
Mhm.
And it's just like, whoa, what was that? That is not like you at all. He is intoxicated in his mind. And then you also have the scene in, I think it's the first episode, where those boys who are harassing Walt Jr. in the clothing store, that you think, we know who Walt is because it's set up so well at the beginning that he won't even touch a gun. He's so timid. And, you know, when you've got Hank, who's, you know, showing that he's all brash and
Yeah.
all of his
I'm a
friends.
cat.
Exactly. And and then Walt is just so demure and passive, but then you see him in the clothing store, and he becomes a badass.
Yeah.
And you're like, he's out of his mind. Like,
Yeah.
that's not Walt. He's
I-
high.
I have notes on that in particular because that's one of the things that I think is the most fascinating about season one is seeing the moments when he snaps into becoming this absolute terrible person, and like that whole I'm blanking on the quote about decay then transformation. To me,
Right.
it's like ultimately setting up the sort of Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde-ness of that first season in particular,
Yes.
where it's really a man who is both sides of the coin. Like once again, by season 2, 3, he becomes more and more of a drug dealer. That's his full-time profession. But in season one,
Right.
he's really still very much a science teacher who so happens to be selling meth on the side. Like he's a meth hobbyist now.
Right. And
Yeah.
this is the thing, is that it is the transformation of Walt from somebody who's experimenting here and there with drugs to
Mhm.
becoming a full-on junkie who cannot function without it, because he can't function without it. And at first, it's like, what happened to me? That was crazy. He comes
Mhm.
back and he makes love to Skylar, and it's like, whoa, what was that? That felt great. He,
Mhm.
beats up those guys in the clothing store, and it's like, whoa, I just became some kind of Superman.
Yeah,
And
last
then, but
episode of the season, after he has a confrontation with Tuco, they end up in the PTA meeting, and he feels up Skylar, and then they end up
exactly.
having sex in the car. It's always after a moment of his like insane violence where he gets his life back and he gets that energy
Yeah.
back. He gets that control over like his sickness, his life, the way he feels about his own failures, and just like that whole like that whole way that they end up crafting the character of Walt in that first season on a man who keeps like flipping and losing out, going full
Yeah.
Mr. Hyde and all that. It's just, I feel like it's so well captured in that first season, and it's something the show does lose to replace with more intense relationships and more intense moments of like drama and like with the drug world and all that. But in that first season, what Walt goes through is so in depth. Like it's the transformation is so brutal, so brutal.
Right, right. And yeah, because the scene where during the PTA meeting, then
Mhm.
it's the more they talk about this, new kind of meth and this, whatever's going on with all these drugs in their community, then he's just like, yeah, and it's his product.
Mhm.
He's ingesting it, and he's getting high as they're talking about it, and that's when he starts, reaching down and he grabs Skylar's leg, and then because it kind of that Walt disappears for a little bit, where they're not cooking, and then when they start up again, then that comes back. And so to me, it's this great irony of the series is that he is constantly telling Jesse, you can't use our product. You can't use our product. Don't be a junkie. Don't use meth. Meanwhile, Walt is using it, but just in a different way.
Yeah, 100%. And that's actually what's crazy. I'm trying to remember this specific line, but I think there is a Jay-Z line from a song called Fallen off his American Gangster album, which is about drug lord going up and coming down in the world of drugs, and Fallen is specifically about when he's coming down. And I'm just going to try and find the line real quick
Sure.
where it's such a perfect line because it's one of my favorite lines about drug dealing and all that.
Right.
It really plays on the sort of reality that Walt ends up finding himself in it. It's yeah.
Yeah, I know. Like one of the lines you were mentioning before,
Yeah.
just while you're looking that up, is I don't know if I have it exactly right, but where Walt says chemistry is the study of matter, but I prefer to
Yes.
think of it as the study of change.
Yes.
Right.
Uh,
And that is him. He changes before us, and as a chemistry teacher, like it's such brilliant writing. You
Yeah.
look at this and you just say, this is so well done. It's so clever that we see him change, and the meth is essentially acting as a catalyst. That the meth is not changing, but it's definitely changing Walt the more he works with it.
And I think that, especially Breaking Bad in general, does this, which is a thing that I think a lot of, you know what? This is a little bit of a tangent about film production and filmmaking, but like one of the reasons why I'm not the biggest fan of studying it in school is that it ends up putting you in a position where everything that you read, everything that you watch, everything that you think about is all filmmaking. And the
Right.
truth is that like the best films, everything that you love about filmmaking, is often movies that aren't about movies in that way. It's like more movies about like the world, about people, and then those things find a way to be interesting when put on film. And Breaking Bad does that so well, where it's such a show about chemistry.
Right.
Everything that you see in the show, everything that's happening to your characters, all of it can be understood through chemistry itself. But it
Yeah.
showcases itself cinematically in a whole different way that I think is just so amazing. And it's like it's the thing that I look at Breaking Bad every time that I need inspiration on how to get inspired, pretty much. That
Right.
like, hey, if I could pick up a chemistry book, class that I ignored in high school, and maybe find a story in there, I need to do more research. I need to do more readings. I need to spend more time with other things than just filmmaking. And Breaking Bad proves that point so thoroughly. It's
Right.
such a meticulous show. But yes, that Jay-Z line as well that I was talking about earlier is the irony of selling drugs is sort of like using it. Yes, it's two sides to what substance abuse is. And I feel like that is
Wow.
the character of Walt throughout season one to the fullest, where he is a junkie on
Yes.
that sort of life of selling drugs, where he gets obsessed with that idea
Yes.
of like, hey, the power it brings to me, the power I feel over my own life, the money I'm finally able to make, that status that I'm able to have, I'm notorious, I'm famous, and people don't even know it's me. Like it's you could see how quickly that idea poisons him and brings out the worst in him. And like,
Right.
let's be honest. That scene that I know that we kind of all enjoy and celebrate when we see it the first time around, where he goes into the store and he beats up the guys that were bullying his son. Those are minors. Walt is definitely assaulting a minor in that scene.
Right.
There's no way that like that isn't a huge crime and he shouldn't go to jail. And the only reason why we feel like Walt's the powerful one in that scene is that he's the smaller of the two characters. But ultimately, he's beating on a child, and like we
Right.
celebrate that scene. And I feel like that's really like what we tend to lose about the character of Walt when we watch the first season, especially when we see how much further it gets to. Just like the decision to kill a person, which he does with very little hesitation in the first episode when he drops the chemicals.
Yeah.
That's a person who's ready to kill other people based on the desperation of their situation, which is something that's still understandable. But like, my goodness, it's dark when you really think about it. And like when he kills Crazy Eight in the basement, that like that is a long scene.
Oh
When
yeah.
he's holding the bike lock,
Uh-huh.
gruesome way to take someone else's life, and it's Walt proves himself to be a psychopath within the first 3 episodes of the show. And like, it's crazy to know with hindsight that I really haven't seen shit yet of how crazy Walt's gonna get and all the things
Right.
he's willing to do. But just those first 3 episodes, delete the rest of the series. Those first 3 episodes are still a masterpiece. It's such a good show.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think you say that he is a psychopath,
Mhm.
but he does agonize over the decision to kill Crazy Eight. And at one point, he does beg him to convince him that he doesn't need to do it, that there is some alternative to this. And it's like this old Walt that ultimately gets that just vanishes the deeper he goes into this industry. That the old Walt does have a sense of right and wrong, but he's just this person who has gotten to this point where he has made all of the correct, responsible decisions his entire life, and it has not benefited him in really in any way, and he's just come to the end of himself. Where
You see, I would argue that already. It has benefited him. He got offered a crazy good job at Gray Matter because of how good of a person he is. He got offered by 2 separate people. Why was I going to call him Dean Norris? My goodness.
Hank.
Hank, yes, Hank and his ex-girlfriend, like Gretchen, I think, ends up calling him and offering to pay.
with Gray Matter, Elliot.
Yeah,
Elliot
well,
Gretchen.
yeah. There's Elliot and Gretchen. They end up calling to offer a check that he refuses. But there's also mentions of parts throughout the episode where, like, it's like Hank saying, like, "Oh yeah, like I could help you guys out," or like we could ask Hank for money. He'd like gladly help us. And like he refuses the help that he has built up with his goodwill and his good actions to become Heisenberg, which is the thing that I keep realizing when I look at that first season is that like. I always remember thinking about the show of like, oh, this show is a really good criticism of like the American like healthcare system and the American education system and things like that. But the truth is that it's also a really big criticism of the American dream in that way, where this person decides that he wants to become self-made at any cost, and like he's willing to kill and murder and do so many horrific things to get that dream that he feels like he missed out on. But even the life that he did leave, the life that he did end up leading, he refuses the good things that came from it to become this sort of idealized entrepreneurial self that is just a murderous, villainous human being.
Yes. And the thing is though, is that it's as though he has to lie to himself to get to that point, because he's telling himself, because I guess when I'm saying that it hasn't benefited him, then I'm saying from Walt's perspective, then he believes that it hasn't benefited him. And so he's looking back on these responsible choices that he made, where he leaves, gray matter and his PhD program and all of that. And it's like, well, I had a baby on the way, so I had to do that to take care of my family. Even though I maybe could have been successful doing this, I made the right decision, the responsible decision. And then ultimately my business partner, that takes off. And then here I am barely earning anything as a high school chemistry teacher. And so then he's looking at that and then he's saying, I have to do this for my family. And it takes a while in the series before it gets to the point where he admits to himself that he's not doing it for his family, that he's doing it for himself because it makes him feel good. But certainly within season 1, that's his thinking, that he has an obligation to take care of his family. And since the choices that he's made that seem like good, responsible, certainly law-abiding choices, since they haven't helped his family, and then the idea that, but the real turn of the series, you're right, it's the gray matter episode when you see that it's his pride that he can't accept that from somebody else. And it's such a strange thing that he rejects that from them. First, the job that's not really a job, right? It's just to help him, to provide him with health care.
Exactly.
And then to refuse the check outright, then that is, if you look at that, then you say, but he was involved in gray matter. Like, that wasn't even a handout, Walt. And
it wasn't.
But I think it's gray matter. It's not white matter. That he doesn't get credit, that it's like, if I have to share this in any way, because we see this with Jesse later on, it's that he doesn't want it to be he and Jesse built this together. It's I built this.
Exactly.
Right?
I am the one who knocks.
That's right. That's right. He has to be that solitary individual at the top, and he can't share it with anybody. And that's introduced in season 1, that he can't share this with Elliot. He can't share this with Elliot and Gretchen, that he's got to have all of the credit or he wants none of it. And that's a huge character flaw, but like it gets introduced here of figuring out who is this guy.
You know what? Speaking of character flaw, to flip that and make it flawed characters, can we talk about Skyler?
Yes, please.
I feel like I want to go back in time to the 2013 version of myself who watched the show and slap him. I feel so bad for all the flack that people have given Skyler. Skyler is a very normal human being. Like, I think what we lose a lot in looking at the show in hindsight is how terrible Walt is. Like, the one scene that always hits me, it doesn't always hit me this time around, was the scene when they're in at the maternity clinic. And then she's like, hey, Walt, like, something's going on. And at this point in time, like, the secret is that he hasn't really told her about his cancer yet. It's not even the drug dealing and the meth business on the side. And then he gives her the speech about, like, I need you to get out, like, off my ass.
Right.
She's, like, 9 months pregnant at this point in time. They're in the maternity clinic. I'm pretty sure he showed up late and high, is distracted, and then gives his wife shit about asking him what's wrong. And like, Skyler is a very tough woman because she goes through a lot of shit in just season 1 with Walt. Like, I think that's like a lot of grounds for just, not even like a divorce, just like straight up getting into a fight with your partner, like a fist fight. I would fight Walt if I had to deal with him. And she is so incredibly tough, and with the life that she's leading at that point in time, where she gets like caught up in that whole situation with her sister, who's a klepto, and like just steals a tiara and things like that, and like she just goes through so much shit. And I feel like no one gives her any credit for actually being a really tough and a really kind-hearted character for sticking with such a terrible person that Walt is in that show. Like, I feel like that's the thing that's really switched for me, is that now I kind of hate Walt in that first season, and I kind of love Skylar for how tough she is.
Okay. Okay.
Tell me about that.
So
I know it's a hot take.
No. I appreciate that, and I think that I think a lot of people are very sympathetic to that argument. Yeah, I really do. And
tide is turned on that.
I do think so. Because I've read enough about it that afterwards people are like, "Whoa, that reaction to her was really overblown."
Yeah.
But so there's a couple things. So in terms of her and Marie, it's such a great introduction of this theme that turns into a leitmotif of this series, that Skylar is so appalled that her sister would engage in criminal activity. And it's like, whew, and then she's married to Walt, right?
Yeah.
That you do learn this about Skylar early on. But it's introduced so well, where you learn it about her in relation to her sister. That's not even her husband. And she doesn't like the fact that it's this secret thing that Marie's been doing, and that Marie is bringing in this stolen article into her home and then offering it as a gift to her baby. That everything that Walt brings in is stolen. All of this money, right? Because it's all like, it's at least all criminal as far as where it's coming from. So I just think if people are looking at that and they maybe don't get, they might think, oh, it's just a side story that it's not related to the main plot, but it absolutely is. It's so necessary to understand Skylar's character and then what happens with Walt. So there's that part. But then I think it gets complicated as far as Skylar just being a victim in this. And it gets complicated when they have their intervention. And Walt has made his decision to refuse treatment. And he explains why. And Skylar does not accept this. She insists that he do really whatever it takes, even if it challenges his own value system, that she's like, you have to stick around. You don't want to do this treatment. You don't want to do this. You don't want to do that, but you need to, right? And if she allowed him to stick to his original decision, as awful as it would have been to have lost him because he refuses treatment, he would have at least died as the Walt that she was originally married to.
Yeah.
But she forces his hand. She doesn't know it. She does not know. I'm not saying that it's her fault. But if she didn't push him so hard on getting treatment, and then he's like, fine, then I'll get treatment my way, right? Yeah. That if she didn't do that, then we wouldn't get Heisenberg.
Yeah, you know what? That I gotta say, I think that's one of the scenes where it really comes through. That and the scenes that push him into becoming Heisenberg, even from his personal life, that like is fully unaware of it, is also the end of one episode in particular where it's Walt Jr. goes in on him and is like, well, if you just want to refuse the treatment, just die. And he just goes off on that speech. Right. That whole speech is just so like painful and like, it's like honestly extremely rude, but like it's such a real perspective on what like Walt's life is like. Yeah. That like when he is at Heisenberg and he falls into, let's say, what Walt would do, he gets those speeches from the people around him of like, hey, you coward, you're being a this, you're being a that. And then he like has bottled so many years of that up that the only way out at this point in time is drug kingpin.
Right. That's exactly it. It's like he's being backed into a corner psychologically by everyone in his life into saying, you can't keep doing this, you can't keep doing this. And he's like, fine! And then he comes up with his own ridiculous solution to this, which is exactly as you say, drug kingpin. And it's,
I think most of us would find a couple other steps in between, you know, oh, I'm refusing cancer treatment, drug kingpin. But like, you know, Walt is in a particular situation where he just snaps. And that's also another thing that I really love about the show. It's really how much Walt snaps.
Yeah.
And Walt is a broken man. Like Walt could have gone like, if you go back maybe 5 years before Breaking Bad starts and you have him go to therapy, this isn't a problem for Walt. Like Walt gets to this point in his life and knows the right decision to make. It's just like, I feel like Breaking Bad is just such a, it does really work well as at showcasing the accumulation of experiences that would define a person like Walt. and that would like kind of push a person like Walt into a situation where these these choices are justifiable within his own perspective. And yeah, I actually wrote something else about that. And that's the first thing. That's another thing I really love about the first season is that it takes so much time to make sure that Walt is always from his specific choice within his specific perspective justifiable. And it goes so far out of its way. And I think, like you were pointing out as well, the scene where it's so obvious is that like when he's trying to decide if he wants to kill Crazy Eight or not, he's about ready to turn on his conviction to murder this man.
Yeah.
Then he finds the plate.
Yes.
And, like he was ready to let him go, and like that would have opened up a whole nother can of worms if we go down that path. Like, and it's what if storyline for Breaking Bad season 1, but like he gets so close to doing the right thing and then realizes the world wants to do the wrong thing to him anyways. So he just goes with the wrong thing. And I feel like that's the thing that I always keep thinking about when I think about Walt is that it's the way he looks when he's just holding that bike lock.
Yeah.
There's so many like that little conversation they have right before where he's like, hey, if I let you go, you promise you're not going to hurt me? And then he lies to him and he's like, yeah, nothing's going to happen. And he's like, all right. And then he's like putting his hands on it. And then you see that he's going underneath his shirt and he's like, and you say that whole thing. And like, if I let go of this, you're not going to stab me with the piece of plate that you have. And then starts to murder the man. And like, it's that moment where he like gives up, where like he really tries to keep finding ways to not kill this person, to not make the wrong decision, but the world keeps forcing Walt's hand. And I really end up, I think that's what's so masterful about the show. It's really how it allows you to stay in that position where you can always see that Walt is wrong. I feel like when you watch things like The Dark Knight or like anything with like a classic anti-hero, like hell, even Rick and Morty, I feel like it's a problem with a lot of the audience when they're watching it is that they end up idolizing these characters for all the wrong reasons. Because they're like, Walt takes control of his life, not realizing how he takes control of his life. But Walt specifically, I think like Vince Gilligan, that whole writers team, that writers room for season 1 is so incredible at making sure that you understand why he's making that decision.
Yeah.
But you know that he is wrong. And I feel like that you never lose sight of where he's failing morally throughout the whole show. Justifiable, but never right.
So what then would have been the correct decision for Walt to make when he realized that Crazy Eight has got that shard from the plate?
You know what?
Because didn't he end up in this situation where, like, knowing that this guy is, if this guy murders Walt, then, you know, well, that ruins everything, because whether Walt gets treatment from, you know, the check from Elliot and Gretchen, or whether he gets treatment from being a drug kingpin, at least Skyler and his family gets what they want, which is for him to stick around a little bit longer and just to be there for them. But if he just straight up gets murdered by this guy, or this guy comes after Walt and his family, and I think that's why Walt agonizes so much, is he's now in this and he doesn't know how to get out of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. Because there's no way they can recoup that piece of the plate safely at that point in time, because he's just going to deny its existence. Yeah. And like, you know what? You knock him out, you tie him up, you take him across state lines. Actually, he knows his name.
Yeah. He knows his name. No.
Yeah.
And Walt is then trying to protect his family. And that's what Walt is doing throughout the series, at least in his head. He's trying to take care of his family. Mm-hmm. And it's like he ends up in this position initially before he starts making meth, where he's just in this position thinking, okay, I now have cancer. And even though I'm already working as a high school teacher and I'm working after school at the car wash, I still can't take care of my family. And now I'm going to die. So I need to do whatever it takes to take care of my family. And then he starts making meth. And before he knows it, because he was not involved in this for very long before, what is the other guy's name? Is it Emilio, I think? Emilio and Crazy Eight, who...
Yes, Emilio.
Emilio is the one who ends up dying.
Exactly.
When he like pours the, what is it? Mercury fulminate or something.
Yeah, in the bathtub, that whole scene, or no, well,
in the camper, in the RV.
Yeah. Oh, gosh,
yeah.
I can't remember what it is. Something fluoride? I can't remember.
Yeah,
it's a really cool name that we should be able to.
Yeah,
pull.
we're not chemistry majors.
You know what? I'm gonna go find it real quick. Give me a second.
Okay.
I want to be able to say that.
Right, and so when Emilio, because they show up and they're like, well, we want this meth because this meth is just. It's a purity level that we've never seen before. And so he did it once. You know what I mean? He made meth once. And then Jesse goes and starts selling it. And then by doing it just once, he ends up murdering one guy. Now trying to figure out how to dispose of a body. Now you've got another dude who's going to probably murder Walt because they had already killed Emilio. And maybe Walt's wife and child. You know what I mean? That he ends up in this position of he didn't know how to get out. But then he does get to that point in season 1 where he's able to get out, where it's like, okay, you made some serious mistakes. You know, you dabbled with selling meth. Who hasn't at one time or another?
Yeah,
right? It happens.
We talked about in the intro. Yeah.
You murdered a couple of dudes, but you know.
Saturday. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
The week.
Right. And then it's like, but now you've made a little bit of cash and you can kind of move on with your life because now you've got this money from Elliot and Gretchen, and then you can get your treatment and you can go back to your regular life. So he does have that as an escape option in season 1. But I don't know that he has an escape option with Crazy 8. He wants one, but he can't find one.
You know what? Like, that's where I think that thing that I said earlier about the first 3 episodes are like its own self-contained movie almost in that way. Where, like, I think it's a 3-episode long pilot. And it's part of the reasons why I kind of failed, the show failed me at first when I watched just episode 1.
You just watched the 1, yeah.
Because those 3 episodes together really create the character that becomes everything else. And that, like, you now know that he has been presented with a shitty situation, has tried to make the best out of it, and his best efforts has made the situation worse. And, like, what's left at this point? Like, at this point in time, he's in the world. He has a skill. When he gets to that moment where he's like standing in front of Jesse, he's like, "You want to cook?" It makes perfect sense because, like, you're at this point in time, you're like, yeah, you've exhausted all your logical options on how to be a better person. So fuck it, just cook.
Right. That is really it. It's just he just seems incapable of being the kind of person who would accept the money from Elliot and Gretchen.
100%.
That as much as we can look at him and say, well, that's a serious character flaw and he's got all of these choices. You also look at this and say, but who we've established Walt to be at this point in the series, he is a person who is incapable of accepting their help. That he doesn't have any other choice. And then that's what makes this so tragic, right? That in the classic definition of tragedy, that your tragic hero who's got this tragic flaw, it's they can't help it. It's that thing that makes them great is also going to lead to their own downfall as far as a tragic hero and Aristotle's definition of it. But you look at Walt and you're like, but he's helpless. Like, he can't help the fact that he's got this pride, this ego, this insistence that he do it himself. And that is ultimately what makes him so great. But you can't remove that from him. Like, you can't extract that. That's just part of Walter White.
Yeah, that's his double-edged sword. That's the thing that allows him to become, to reach his highest heights and will bring him to his lowest lows as well. Like, it's that crutch of his pride is just, it's something that just, it ruins him. It thoroughly ruins Walter White, the person he could have been.
Yeah. And I do think that intervention scene that you have where, you know, he is saying, I've made my choice, I'm refusing treatment. And then Skyler's saying, like, no, you can't do this. And he ultimately, you know, they go to bed that night. He sees, like, the books about, like, eating for cancer and all of that that Skyler has, and he's like, oh, she's working so hard to try to help me and to save me. And he just, you know, he genuinely loves Skyler, and that's something that we do see in season 1 that remains. He just genuinely loves her so much. But then it's this whole point of, if you need him to stick around, there's only one way that he can do it. That it's like, I want you to live, I want you to survive, I want you to beat this thing, but she wants him to do it in a way that he's incapable of doing. And that's the tragedy of him, is that's what makes it so tragic, is that he's helpless in this. As much as it looks as though he's got all of these escape options throughout to be able to stop pursuing this. We also know from a character standpoint, from a psychological standpoint, that he just is incapable of not making that decision. And you're just watching this awful thing happening and you are screaming, take that exit, stop doing this, you can escape over here. And at the same time that but he can't, because that's just not who he is.
And you know what, I'm sorry to kind of interject there, but
no, you go for
it. Wanted to tell. I think that's one thing that I also failed to like bring up. That now that you've mentioned it, I really noticed. It's like Walt's a lot of his character motivation seems to be defined through what he is perceiving as his failures towards Skylar directly. Like I have failed as a provider, so I need to do this. I need to go through the treatment because you love me enough to try and keep me here. But I don't even love myself enough to try and keep myself here. And it's like, you could tell so much in that first season that he's trying to become the man that I think he feels like Skylar expected him to be.
Yeah.
He left Gray Matter and sold that, and like this kind of hot shot that he was at the time. And it's weird to say this, but Walter White clearly peaked at Caltech.
Right.
Yeah, and that's the guy that got her pregnant, the sort of peak Walter White. And I find it so interesting that you could see that that his failure, his love for her, ends up motivating him because he just feels like he's failed someone that he's loved. And when he says that he wants to do this stuff for his family and all that, it becomes really clear. Also, just real quick, phosphine gas. It was phosphine
gas. Thank you.
Phosphine gas. But yeah, I just feel like it's one of those things that you see it so clearly in that first season that, even when he gets into his Heisenberg mode wants to make passionate love to his wife.
Yes.
Sort of love that is in him, even at his worst, does showcase itself throughout the rest of the series as well. Even in that final episode where a lot of these elements that we're talking about with Gray Matter, the way that he feels about his family, his pride, all those things come to light really in that final episode of the series. I just feel like it's so well set up in that first season. And I feel like that's it. Skylar, just an underrated character from top to bottom.
Yeah.
That, she's the reason why he does all this. She's his conscious at the same time. She's also his motivator at certain moments. It's just without that Skylar presence in his life, which is ultimately that love that he has for his family and why he justifies everything that he does, it wouldn't happen. It's just Skylar in particular is always that sort of reflection of what his conscious is trying to tell him why he shouldn't.
Yes.
She's always the shouldn't, and it's the shouldn't that he loves. It's that self-loathing that he can't get rid of, that sort of thing that's always with him, even though he's trying to become better than it. It just always finds a way to rear its head and tell him what he knows is true, even if it doesn't know what the truth is, which just such a well-written character. Shouts to Skylar. Shouts to Skylar.
Yeah.
Also, you know what? I was thinking, because you also mentioned that thing about tragedy. One thing that I did notice in the first 3 episodes again, and just the rest of the series, season 1, 2, is that it's so much more comedic than I remembered.
Oh, yeah.
It's a screwball Marx Brother comedy for the first, with the bathtub moment. That is a very graphic, disgusting, hardcore version of a Marx Brother joke, where it's just the wrong job. I thought it was a good job. They're joshing around and joking, and like I was saying, the scene where they're kicking each other on the toilet is hilarious.
Yes.
I've never laughed out loud watching Breaking Bad, but I think the comedy in the show is so well executed and so well done, yet never in a million years would I ever laugh out loud watching that show. And I was just thinking, what do you think about the comedy in the show? I feel like it's really well used.
Oh, it's so well used, and it is interesting how often it comes up, and it's strange because it's not even that, because of the way comedy is used often, especially if you're looking at, let's say, because I feel like I cannot get through a podcast without mentioning the MCU, despite myself. I mean, it is just this massive thing that hangs over everything.
Talking about media, the MCU comes in, of course.
And the way the MCU uses comedy to punctuate their films and to relieve tension at times, Breaking Bad isn't doing it to relieve tension. It's naturally coming out of these scenarios, and it reflects real life so well that even in the midst of something awful happening, there can still be comedy that doesn't necessarily break the tension, but it's just like, even if you're arguing with somebody, then sometimes it's just the argument turns ridiculous and then you start laughing. And it's just the way it comes up like that. It's
fuck you and your fucking eyebrows. Right. That is hilarious. Right. That's really mean, but it's also fucking hilarious.
And it's so good because you know that this has been driving Walt crazy the entire time that he's been working there. It's driving us crazy as viewers. We're like, somebody comment on those eyebrows. Yeah. And when he finally does, then he's angry, and that's where it comes out. It's not really supposed to break the tension of the scene. It's not supposed to be that Walt is now not angry anymore. It's that even in the midst of an argument, something funny can still happen, right? And it's that natural inclusion of comedy that you get.
I think another really good moment for that natural inclusion of comedy involves that banker dude, who is played by the guy. I don't know what's this actor's name, but he's played so many different assholes. I feel really bad for him.
I was gonna say, isn't his name Douchey McDoucherson?
Yeah, he's Douchey McDoucherson the third, because it used to be Bradley Cooper, but then he upgraded out of that role. But yeah, he has such a douchebag face, and I hate that guy so much. And I've seen him in so many different things where I hate him. And when he's having that conversation inside.
That was an hour.
Oh, that's an hour? Jesus. Yeah. Wow. Okay.
That's what I told you. I told you it'll happen.
I have so many more points that I have not even touched on.
I've got time. So
okay. Wow. Goodness. But yeah. Wow. That was an hour. Jesus. Yep. Okay. What was I saying? Breaking Bad.
Douchey McDoucherson.
Douchey McDoucherson.
The third.
The bag of asses. So he, like, that scene when his car blows up at the end of the episode is one of my favorite, because first of all, Walt gets. Okay, so Walt, the character, is having cool guys don't look at explosions.
Yes, that is 100% what it is. He doesn't run. It's like, don't look like cool guys don't look at explosions. They also don't run.
Yes, and that's what's so weird is that, like, while you could see that Walter White is having a moment, you could tell that Bryan Cranston, the actor, is terrified. That's it.
Right.
Well, that's, I think, the one moment of subpar acting from Bryan Cranston that you see throughout the whole show is that when he's walking away, you could just tell his steps are tiny and he's tense. He's like, oh goodness, it's gonna happen any second now.
That's right. What if the gas tank explodes? Exactly. What if a piece of shrapnel takes out my head?
You can see him thinking like, oh, I need to not flinch when this blows up, so that I can have my cool guy moment. But he is terrified, and I just love that scene in particular because I feel like that's a perfect use of how that's a perfect showcase of how comedy is used in Breaking Bad, where like that moment is hilarious for what it means in the sort of like pattern of the episode where he gets like his comeuppance and all that. And it's like, got you guys moment. But at the same time, it's so not funny. It's not played for its laughs, but it's hilarious.
No, that's the thing, is that it's not played for its laughs. And that's what distinguishes it from the MCU. So the MCU can't make a joke without making it silly.
Yeah.
Breaking Bad can have something that's very funny, but it's not necessarily silly. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And I mean, because, and one of the things that happens in that, and it works really well with my other like favorite moment of comedy from season one is, so the banker dude comes out and he's like, oh no, like do something, call the fire people, right? The fire people. And that line, it pairs so well with Jesse Pinkman when he's on like that overlook look when they're out in like episode 1 and they've got the RV and he's like, how does it look? Because he's like scouting the location. He's like, oh, it's good. There's just some cows in a cow house. Cow house? Yeah, the place where cows live.
I totally forgot about Cow House. Cow House is a really funny line too.
Cow House made me laugh out loud. Like I cannot help that.
I think that's the line that maybe got Aaron Paul to survive. Is that like that line? If anyone shows up, you can't be a director with a guy on set like who says Cow House and believes it and say, kill that guy.
Right.
I'm gonna kill that. You gotta keep him around forever.
And it's just like, to me, it's so funny of how has this kid made it through life up until this point and he's never learned the word barn.
Yeah,
Like,
he's
that's like
pretty
in
successful
children's books,
drugster.
in picture books, like when you learn about barnyard animals. And it's just so funny because it's also believable that he's such a burnout that he wouldn't know what the term is. He's just
Yeah.
like, it's a cow house. But then the other banker dude of call the fire people. Like,
Yeah.
it's such great comedy of that's not the word, you idiot.
That I think that's also why I love the fire people line so much. It shows just like how inconsiderate that character is. He doesn't know the word fireman. He doesn't
Yeah.
know that's an essential service that every city has. He's
Right.
like, you know, the fire people. Get them
Right.
on the phone.
Exactly. Some lowly person who does this thing.
Yes,
That I
exactly.
can't be bothered with.
Yeah, he's like somebody else help my problem, not like
Right.
come help me help this problem by calling the fire people or anything like that. It's somebody else solve my problem, which is just
Yes.
like it's the also like simultaneously the opposite of what Walt is, where he's the character who has to make everything for himself, make things work for himself, and even if he puts in his best efforts, the worst things happen to him. But like this guy here is just the 40K bonus banker who's complaining that it's too small, and when his car blows up, doesn't even ask for help in a considerate way. You know, like
Right. Right.
it's the other side of pride almost that you see in that, like the someone who has had that pride their whole life, how they would act as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Somebody who's just a complete narcissist.
Exactly, like to quote the MCU again, he's Doctor Strange in the first
Yeah.
movie. You know, like
Yeah,
he's
absolutely.
a piece of shit. Side of the selling,
So
Jesse ends up
can we?
representing both of those
I know that
sides
you've got lots of other
simultaneously.
stuff
And I
that
find
you want
that
to
really
mention,
cool
but
that character
can we maybe
because like
talk about
I really don't
Jesse
think
Pinkman? Because
it's
kind of
often
surprising
been
that we
painted that
haven't
way
really
when there's
talked
usually a character that is, let's say, on the side of the dealing who's also using. It's through extended periods of time of dealing where they finally get into the product. But that's one of the first major acts of villainy that I think that you see from Walt is that he goes exploit someone who's already stuck in that situation. A lot of times, like I was saying, a lot of these movies would be like, oh, two brothers or something, and then they
Yeah.
the game together, and then one brother, oh, why are you doing this? No, stop it, and all that stuff. None of that ever really comes about in this show, and when it does come about, it comes off really like as bullshit because like this wouldn't be a problem. He wouldn't be smoking the best meth he could have ever been smoking if it
Right.
wasn't for Walt. And I really think that like throughout the entire series, if there's one character who is 100% like I think a victim of Walt's manipulation and Walt's evilness in general, it's Jesse.
Yes.
Jesse
Yes.
for a character that we all know how the series ends, and I still have yet to see El Camino actually, but I feel like it's one of those things that Jesse gets such the short end of the stick, and Jesse is an excellent person regardless of his drug use. That like he's never really I don't think from what I understand about the character that there was any notable violence in his drug dealing career till he meets
Right.
Walt. And
Right.
then one day in with Walt, he ends up in his head at that moment in time with two bodies to deal with.
Yeah.
We did mention something about Skylar and how she feels about criminality. And there is actually that one scene where she approaches Jesse to shit on him because she thinks that he's selling Walt weed. And
Right.
like he just ends up eating so much shit for Walt. He goes as far as like we know, killing a person because of Walt. And Jesse Pinkman is just such a nice person and a person who is in a shitty situation due to his addiction, who gets
Yes.
1000% exploited by Walt. And for me, the one scene that I feel like this is a character moment that doesn't really come up again. Correct me if I'm wrong if it comes up in season 2, but Jesse's parents, do we ever see them again in season 2?
I'm sure that we do see them again, but I can't remember when. I'm sure that we do, but
Yeah,
it's been a while since I've seen the other seasons, so.
yeah, me too. But I do think that there might be like some of his parents after his girlfriend dies. But apart from that, like Jesse is just a person who gets in the shit. Like I really feel bad for that character because like not that his life would have been better without meeting Walter White.
Mhm.
He would have probably still been addicted to meth.
Mhm.
But it gets so much worse because of Walt's choice to use him as
Yeah.
his sort of proxy person into this world of drugs. And Jesse is just, I feel so bad for that character. It's one of the characters who I think gets the shortest end of the sticks, him and Skylar.
Yeah, well, I do think that Jesse is probably victimized worse than anybody else the entire series, even though other characters die, but they're not victimized for this extended period of time.
Mm-hmm.
But Jesse is just, it goes on and on and on, and it's not just Walt who exploits him and victimizes him, it's other people who start getting involved in
Yeah.
this.
Tuco by
And
the end of the first season.
exactly. Yeah. Already just within the first season, then
Yeah.
because of what Walt wants him to do, then he, just gets beaten horribly. But when Walt first approaches him, and I really noticed it this time when I was watching season one, I'm sure it's in the first episode. Then when Walt approaches Jesse, it is immediately a threat.
Yeah.
It is, you need to do this or I'm going to turn you in.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it just starts out immediately of like, what choice did Jesse have in this entire thing?
Yeah.
That like the only thing that he did wrong, obviously, like he's obviously a drug dealer, cooking meth and all of that. But as far as what did he do wrong to get involved with Walt is he jumped out of the neighbor's window when Walt
Yeah.
was doing a ride along with Hank and the DEA, and
Mhm.
Walt recognized him. And it's because of that his life goes on this awful, awful path for years, years of suffering. And you say he didn't really make any choices at all.
Yeah.
He was just pulled along against his will the entire way. And you look at this and you say, well, what can he possibly do to escape this? And season one does such a good job of showing that he really is incapable of, because of his addiction, that he's incapable of being successful in any other field. And
yes.
when he tries to get a regular job and he goes back home to his parents because it's like, all right, well, we've now got these 2 dead bodies. I don't want to stay at home anymore because I've got a hole in my floor.
He tries to reintegrate into society. Like in season one, him and Walt are arguably going in opposite directions. Where Walt's trying to get in, and he's trying to get out.
Totally.
Walt drags him to hell.
Yeah.
That wanna cook line really fucks up that kid's whole life. And like,
I guess it's there that you could say that Jesse does have a choice and that he doesn't have to continue on, but we see that he can't get a regular job and he can't be successful in anything else because, in part from his addiction, that he doesn't have much in the way of a formal education. He doesn't really have employable skills, and then he still is an addict. So even if he could somehow get a job, he wouldn't be able to keep a regular job, not unless he gets serious treatment.
Yeah. And
So,
which is something he couldn't afford unless he sold meth, which like when in the ways that Breaking Bad wants to do that sort of criticism of the American healthcare system, and even in this case like the war on drugs and how it's actually affected the people who use it, like it's such a great way to criticize that problem in society where it's like, hey, look, this person, even if they wanted to do the right thing, our society will not give them the chance to because we don't see any value in them.
right.
And we also won't give them a chance to get out of their problems.
Right.
So ultimately, when a person like that finds himself with the only person giving him an opportunity being a sadistic drug dealer, what other option does he really have? Like poverty or this terrible choice?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And this is where, as much as Skylar is a victim, you do get, and this is kind of jumping ahead, but when she goes back to work and then she starts cooking the books for her boss.
Yeah.
right? That she starts engaging in criminal activity too. She won't do it for Walt, but she will do it for this other guy that she's not even married to. But Jesse is never really, like, we never see that side of him. He never is willingly participating in these things. He really does seem to be just a victim for the entire time, the entire series, despite his best intentions, and he is always a reluctant participant. He's never eager to do these things, but he's unable to do anything else.
Yeah,
and which is such a tragedy.
Yeah, the only time he gets offered anything different is by Gus when he's offering him like the chance to take over the lab when he's planning on killing Walt, and like that's the only time that like a recognition of his value, I think, that I can at least remember off the top of my head, really happens in the series where someone's willing to give him a shot. But once again, still a terrible life situation and choice. But like that's the shot that he gets. Like the man just has a brutally difficult gig given to him, and Jesse Pinkman is the like if you ever want to understand like the suffering that Walt is actually causing to the people around him, just look at whatever's going on with Jesse.
Right.
Jesse is like the manifestation of the suffering that Walt can cause. Like,
absolutely,
it's such a. I think it's a really interesting character to have in a show of this nature with like the drugs underworld and all that. And from what I understand now, it's a little bit more of a set of tropes that has been copied going forward. But prior to Jesse Pinkman, I can't really picture many other characters that found themselves in similar situations where they were like truly incapable of making a better choice than the world of drugs.
Right. Yeah, that really is it. And you see that he's such a good person. You see this in season 1, despite the addiction, when he goes back home and then his younger brother has got the joint, but then he takes the blame for it, knowing that his parents already, don't think much of him whatsoever. And you're like, oh, look at that. He's even willing to, like, he's got this goodness in him.
And on top of it, at the end of that episode, when his brother asks for it back, he gets really disappointed and walks away. Yeah. Like, I think he like stomps it on the ground and walks away afterwards.
He does.
And like I think that tells you what he actually thinks of drugs beyond his addiction. Like he thinks that it's a bad thing that shouldn't be in people's lives, and he lives the consequences of not having learned that through an exterior experience and having to learn it through his own life. And like Jesse is just like watching again season 1. There's so many times where I just want to like give Jesse a hug and just be like,
right,
on in, like just like get out of the cold. Like it's never gonna get better for you out there. And it's such a dark timeline you find yourself in, especially like there's one little simple thing that happens with Jesse as well with when Hank and Walt Jr. go to that weird motel and they try to like scare him straight.
Right.
And then there's that weird like hooker lady there.
Yeah.
And then like 2 scenes later, you see that she's chilling with Jesse. And like everything that has just been said about like the world of meth and the problems that it can cause in life, you immediately get that connected so deeply to like one of your main characters right afterwards. And I think that's maybe one thing that I'm not sure what the experts on this would say, but I do think that, at least as a guy who's watched a lot of movies and knows the tropes of them, Breaking Bad does a really good job at portraying drugs and drug addiction in particular very differently from other shows or other things that I had seen at least previous to that. Whereas like it's never depicted as like, come on, you junkie, you gotta do better. It's like these are all the situations that make that possible. And like the same thing that they do with Walt, the justifiable but wrong. I think they do it really well with drug addiction as well throughout Breaking Bad, where you never don't feel bad for like maybe some of the random junkies that you end up encountering, you don't feel so bad for. But because we all know that like Jesse would have arguably been one drug bust being noticed by your ex teacher in the backseat of his car, of a police car,
Right.
away from being in the same situation as anybody else that you meet as a junkie throughout the whole show. So like it really does that same act of dehumanizing some of the people that are addicted to drugs, but at the same time, it does really frame it through Jesse and like his struggle with drugs. So you always really understand the internal turmoil of someone who would find themselves in that position. And
Right.
like even like there's scenes where Jesse is critical of drug use and other people's use of drugs, and like it just never allows you to forget that like Jesse knows that he has a problem. And I
Yeah.
really love that about the show, that like it never goes to the point where he's like, "Oh, I'm just a junkie. Let me do this." It's like every time that he falls into his addiction, it's like when things are going bad or when things are like tough for him, and like
Yeah.
he's like he can do really well for a really long time, and then just get lost in the drugs again. And
Yeah.
that part of like what addiction works like on a psychological level, so
Yeah.
incredibly well represented.
It is. Yeah, it really is. And it's a great depiction of this entire world of addiction and the underground world of the drug trade, because you see all kinds of different types within this, right? And Jesse is certainly, and it is a sympathetic depiction, but it's not overly sympathetic, right?
Exactly. Hmm.
And it's not ridiculous, like, oh, we can't realistically look at what it's like for somebody who has an addiction, where it just becomes cartoonish of what these people are going through. It's a very grounded, realistic depiction of it without being overly sympathetic towards him. And you can also see that he's stuck in this world where there's incredibly violent people who are completely unhinged, and he has no choice but to interact with them,
Hmm.
right? That as long as drugs are illegal, then you're going to have people like Tuco and even
Hmm.
Emilio and Crazy Eight. That Jesse doesn't want to be violent. He is not a violent person whatsoever, but he has no choice because of his addiction to be associated with people who are incredibly dangerous.
Yeah.
And then even for his family, what is his family supposed to do? Right? That if they allow him to live at home, that's just going to, like,
Facilitate.
exactly.
Mhm.
So you look at that and you're like, it's a sympathetic depiction, because it's like, well, what do you do with a person like this? How do you help him? Because you can't help him by saying, continue doing what you're doing and we'll allow you to live here rent free. Um, but you also don't want to see him just be, cast away and discarded.
Yeah.
That, and it doesn't really offer a solution. It presents a problem and just says, this is a problem, and feel it. Feel how much that's a problem.
Yes, I think that's one thing that you get to experience with Breaking Bad as well, as like the enduring difficulties of drug addiction, and the enduring difficulties of finding yourself in those situations. Like it's not just, oh, this happened one time, so this is all we like. It's like drug addiction is not like a bottle episode in these people's
Right.
lives. It's the whole show. It's like it's a problem that creeps its head in so many different ways, especially in Jesse's life. Because I'm pretty sure that what ends up happening, if I remember correctly, is that in season 2 he's pretty clean for a while. Then he meets his girlfriend, who's a user, and then he falls right back into it. And then when she dies, he falls super deep into it again.
He's
And
gonna get
like
into heroin, right? 'Cause
exactly,
that's her issue, and
that's
so
exactly it. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah,
it becomes like the sense of like grief and that comes with a drug addiction, or like the grief of having to deal with someone in a drug addiction is really well felt throughout the show in a way that like you mentioned, just so sympathetic and not overly sympathetic, but
right,
so properly sympathetic towards the real life issues that causes.
right. The other thing I wanted to mention, this is just a silly little thing, but because like one of the, like my favorite lines from Jesse is the cow houses, right? I love
Yeah.
that. But then the other one, my next favorite scene that you get with him in this season is when he goes to the hardware store and he's trying to find a plastic bin, and then he calls Walt, and he's so perplexed. He's like, "There's no plastic bins big enough to fit a human body," and he's like trying to fit into these things without like tipping over. And
Which honestly, like, I think I love that scene so much because it also showcases how he's a smart person. That, like,
right,
I think about it, that I wouldn't have thought about it, like, with the, can I fit my body into this? Because if my body fits, then maybe your body does fit into this. And there's just, like, little moments where you could tell that Jesse had the chance and the capacity to be brilliant, but, like, drug addiction and maybe, like, a lack of motivation at different points in his life really put him in this situation that he's now
yeah,
stuck in. And like
right.
best efforts can't get him out of it. And just Jesse is such a precious character to me. Like really one of the highlights of the show. With a show that has nothing but highlights really to offer, it's
Right.
Jesse is such a well-formed, well-developed character. Just,
Yeah, I agree. And yeah, and he is so bright that he does realize, before I buy this thing, I better make sure that you can get a body in here. But also, it's very childlike the way he does it.
yes.
Because isn't that what a kid would do? Kids always are trying to do that kind of thing. And you
Yeah.
see him, and he is really young at this
Mhm.
point in the series. And you see him like tipping over in this thing in the hardware store. And you're just like, oh, like, even though he's involved in such a frightening thing of, drug addiction,
Mhm.
you get a lot of sympathy there.
Yeah.
Of, but he's still just such a young person who is just kind of out there on his own.
Yeah, they're always showcasing his innocence in that way.
Yes.
He's like, they're always finding ways to show that, like, hey, like he's a person who has a
Yeah.
problem. He's not just that problem on 2 feet walking around.
Exactly. And yeah, because at first, like when I first watched it, especially the first couple episodes, then I thought that he was kind of this caricature of a druggie, right? And I
The
think it was
page and all that stuff. Yeah.
exactly. And then they just kind of kept exploring his character more and more and more. And then at the same time, he just continues to get victimized more and more and more until and that is really one of the best parts of the series is everything to do with Jesse.
Yeah, really. Jesse, I can understand why, if you're going to make a Breaking Bad movie, you'd want to center it around Jesse after Walt, because that is where there is still a lot of story to be told in this universe. Like, I'm also guessing Better Call Saul takes care of a lot of the extra stories to be told in this universe. But for Breaking Bad itself, that Jesse character, that man lives a life, man. I always sympathize for that character.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's impossible not to.
Yeah. It's genuinely impossible. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah. And so I wanted to know, what else do you have? Because I know that you've got notes.
Yeah, you know what? Now we've actually touched on most of them. I was probably gonna go off on the bathtub moment because that is just still something I can't believe was on television at one point in time. That is so disgusting and so hardcore. Yeah. There was also something I wanted to bring up about the classroom and Walt and how that where he I'm not sure if I mentioned this in one way or another already, but like about how the classroom where he shows that like the scenes of the in the classroom where he's talking about chemistry. I should have mentioned that when I was talking about why the show's great for focusing on chemistry. Like when he's talking about chemistry, he's always confronting himself where he is in life. So there's always a sense of like using that chemistry, that classroom, those moments when he's like, you can almost hear why he ends up thinking about himself in those speeches because he's talking about chemistry purely. But the way that he describes it, when we talk about transformation or how something changes or how the matter is affected, ends up representing what Walt has to tell himself over the course of the episode in a very specific way that I absolutely love. And like even I think there's just one moment where he's in the classroom and I can't remember what he's writing down. I think it's like right before he kills Crazy 8 where he's writing something down and then he goes like stop or he says something weird and then everyone stops and looks at him and then he like tries to play it off normally and
right.
It's just like it's one of those moments of that's weirdly comedic absolutely unfunny, really deep. The classroom as confrontation of self, and like there's so many layers to it in that one little moment that I love it. There also I find that the first season is significantly less cinematic than the
Mm,
future seasons, and I think
mhm.
it really helps it that it has that weird gritty documentary aesthetic. Um,
Yes.
uh, Let me see if there's anything else that's really good. Oh, I did forget to mention this too. That like when he's trying to abandon his murderous intent, like the conversation he has with Crazy Eight is about furniture.
Hmm.
Like he's literally trying to grasp at any reason to
Right.
not kill this person. And
Right.
just the idea of furniture and a furniture store and a link that they might share is enough for him to convince himself that he shouldn't kill the person. So fate forces his hand again. Let me see if there's anything else that I really, really, really love. The self-inflicted problem. Oh, letting the janitor take the fall.
Oh yeah, that's a
That
great storyline that you have. Like just a small little subplot, but he's the janitor is introduced enough that you have so much sympathy for him,
yeah,
right? That
like
he,
it
yeah,
shows kind of how Walt will end up using Jesse, where he's willing to use another person as a sacrifice for his own gains. And
yeah,
like it's so and like he goes as far as, oh yeah, let me check the inventory and all that, and finds that there's a scapegoat and lets it go on him, you know?
yes, yeah, absolutely. That you know that this guy is innocent, but because of his own issues with drug use in the past,
Hmm.
then he's in big trouble. But because Walt has never had addiction issues, then no one suspects him.
And I think that's where it wraps around again into being commentary on how society treats drug addiction and
Yeah,
people in those situations as well. Is that you can get out of that situation, you can become a janitor, you can have no involvement with a crime, but your past can still come back to haunt you. And I think like those little moments. Oh, dude, I have so many more notes. My God. Um. Oh, the discussion between Walt and Hank about drugs and like the legality and the whole thing about like,
mm,
hey, meth a couple years ago could be sold over the counter, and
right.
like that, which also is one of the ways that they frame the whole societal perception of drug and drug use and drug users
Yes.
as well. Um, the morality of stealing. I forgot this one too, where they steal the drum, and in the same episode, that's where she steals the tiara, and how they're kind of compared, like
Right.
as they go about, and like as they're both non-violent crimes for different reasons, and they fuel different problems, but one will be handled with different. So many levels, so much
Absolutely.
shit in this. Um, where he becomes too much was in season 3 when Walt's regret about his life decisions, flashbacks. Yeah, that too. Waltz. Should have mentioned this when we were talking about. No, I really
That's
should
okay. You're mentioning it
focus my
now.
notes. Yeah. There's also that thing about when Walt. The flashbacks. The use of flashbacks are really well used to end up creating the web of regret that fuels
Mm,
Walt
yeah.
through the rest of the series. Really, because I think once again, I feel like it's been too many years since I've seen the other seasons, but like the flashbacks really cut out. I think maybe after season 2
Mm,
of going back into Walt's life in that way, and then it becomes really about what's happening to Walt in that one moment in time as he's building his drug empire. But like the use of past justifies so much of his current pride. And like I
yes.
back to that episode 5 with Gray Matter when he's discussing with Gretchen at the time about like what's inside the body, the soul, and all that.
Adding it up. Yeah.
You could tell like how much this past version of himself was his peak. And it's crazy that the same aged actor of Bryan Cranston played both of those roles because he does
Right.
look so much younger in
Right. He does.
the flashback. And it's just I feel like the use of flashbacks throughout the first season in particular really help define that character so well because like there's not a point like that's the thing. Like while it's all used to justify pride, it also allows you to understand the direct path of pride that is affecting him at that moment in time. So
Yeah.
those gray matter flashbacks of him in like the little cubicle, and they're just like hashing ideas out, and he's like coming up with all the right answers. And then you get to that scene where he's at the party, and
Yeah.
then there's like that other guy who's there, like, oh yeah, like Walt was a genius, and he used to do this and this and this, and like people that are more successful than him still look at him with high regard, yet he's
Right.
not them, and like you could tell that like that sense of that we all started at the same starting line and I was better than you guys, but now I'm behind you is so well encapsulated in that like flashback in particular. And
Well, how much of Walt's decision to continue, like to really push into making meth,
yeah,
how much of that do you think came from the party where he's looking at the way people are reacting to him, and they have these expectations since he was one of the founders of gray matter, and then he's not lived up to those expectations whatsoever? Because even when, and he's trying to be as polite as possible when he frames it, I mean, maybe not polite, but he's trying to be at least coy about his decisions in life. He's saying, oh, I decided to pursue education instead. And
yeah,
they're like, oh, like what institution or what school, right? And like
Mhm.
it's like, oh, it's a high school, it's not a university, because they expect he has his PhD and he's a
Mhm.
professor and he's some kind of leading academic, that he's just seeing everybody. And you would think in this moment where people are looking to him saying, you are brilliant and you do have a brilliant mind, or at least in the past you've done all of this great work, and then realizing that his life doesn't match that expectation at all. How much of that do you think, motivates him to then push into, building up this drug empire? Because
oh,
he's saying,
100%. I would say
yeah,
that that's to me that moment of emasculation almost that happens to him
yeah, yeah,
is the opposite is shown in that last episode at the parent teacher meeting, where he's getting that same sort of praise, but like
yes,
the version of it that he wants of like
right,
I'm
yes,
scary, I am fear, I
yeah,
am power, and not like you have the capacity to be powerful, you have the capacity to inspire, you have the capacity to do all these things, which is what is being told to him at the party. So like I really do feel like that scene at the end of season one is really to showcase the opposite feeling for Walt. That like
right,
um he has a he is his own harshest critic, which is like
yes,
like motif that like it's everyone, it's human. Like you are always
right,
your own harshest critic, but Walt in particular does not want to hear every good thing that he's done. Like I feel like
right,
Walt wants to be praised and to be respected in one way in particular that he has not yet felt, and that's what leads him into becoming Heisenberg. That sense of being empowered. Like I
mm-hmm.
don't think he feels empowered when he's helping somebody else solve a problem. I don't think he feels
Mm,
empowered when he is joining a great company. But he
mm,
does feel empowered if he is the founder of that company and he owns it and he has the shares. So like working for it is a step down. He doesn't want that. He does feel empowered if people are talking about how he's destroying his community or how he has the power to destroy his community. And like I feel like that empowerment of through his pride so well shown. So like in that moment, that's what you're seeing in Walt is that like his pride needs to be like catered to specifically, and
right.
this does not work for him. And it's such a beautiful. The show is so. I wish I had a better sense of how to create that so I can describe it better. Because
I
like if I
hear
could
you.
create that, also it would have been a lot harder for us to have this conversation. I'd be big in Hollywood and shit. But like,
That's right. That's right.
it's just it's so well crafted that it takes the right moments, takes the right pauses, takes every single instance for you to never get confused about these characters. The characters are so incredibly consistent, and like
Yes.
like I was saying about the flashbacks, that's how it showcases the consistency of Walt. Like when he is that teacher that is making you learn things and you're paying attention to him, he loves it. When he's a high school teacher where people don't pay attention to him and don't even try hard with the lessons that he does give them, he hates it, and
Yep.
he
Yeah.
needs to
So
have it in a specific way.
yeah, And so this is like one of the most interesting lines that you get in season one. And I wanted to bring this up. When Walt is in the basement with Crazy Eight and they're having this conversation, he's, begging him to convince him that he doesn't need to go through with this, that he doesn't need to actually kill him. Then Crazy Eight says to him, and I forget the character's real name because you do ultimately get that, but
let me try and find that for you while you talk. All right.
Yeah. So what Crazy Eight ends up saying is he says this type of work doesn't suit you. And what a fascinating line, because
I fucking love that line so much.
Yeah, isn't it like one of the best lines that you get, because it's just so loaded, it's saturated with meaning. Because look at Walt in his past, because it ties into these flashbacks, being a part of an incredibly successful pharmaceutical company, this Gray Matter. Being a part of it, that doesn't suit him. Being an academic, that doesn't suit him. Being a teacher, a high school teacher, that sure doesn't suit him, right? Even though he's good at it, like that's not what...
It's not about being good at something.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And then it becomes this thing of this guy saying this type of work or this line of work doesn't suit you. It's like, not yet, but watch.
Yeah.
Because it seems like Walt was born to be Heisenberg, to do what he does. And to see him step into this role of this persona of being Heisenberg, and then that kind of takes over his entire life. It's just so interesting, that whole line of, so what type of work does suit Walt?
Yeah. That is actually such a great point. And what's crazy is that Gray Matter is a pharmaceutical company in the show, right?
I don't know. I'm assuming. I can't remember.
I can't remember what Gray Matter is either.
Obviously dealing with chemistry, though.
Yeah, definitely dealing with chemistry. Let me just double check that statement, because it would actually be amazing if Gray Matter was a pharmaceutical company, because it's drugs. And it's ultimately the exact same skill. It's just that on the level that he's doing it, people die, and arguably on the level that Walt could find himself doing it with Gray Matter, people could die as well. But
well, people do die from pharmaceuticals, right? From the opioid epidemic. It's an insane amount of people.
That's so true.
Is right. That's why I use it as a sponsor, because I'm saying and the slogan I said is a different kind of drug dealer.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I think it was last year or something, 80,000 Americans died from opioid overdoses. And I believe that's more than Vietnam, in a year, more than the number of men who died in the Vietnam War. It's staggering. It's staggering what it has done. And even though they are not necessarily dying ultimately from the pharmaceutical, because they start getting street level versions of it, but it starts there.
Heroin at that point.
Yeah, exactly, because heroin's just cheaper and easier to find if you can no longer get fentanyl or all the other ones. I forget them.
Yeah,
I'm not a buyer. I don't.
Yeah, it's oxycodone. That's the one. But yeah, man, it's such a the show meticulous in its craft.
Yeah, because then it ties in. Right. Then it ties into what you're talking about, of the conversation that Hank and Walt have over what drugs are legal and which ones aren't. And it's this whole idea of, that's how Walt is justifying this in his head. It's, well, I could have become incredibly rich from, doing something in pharmaceuticals. And then people would say, oh, thank you so much for your work, even if the side effects are killing off way more people than he ultimately is going to kill with his blue meth. But then it's so what's the difference then with me going and producing all of this? And it's even though people are using it recreationally, ultimately the death toll might be much, much lower over here, but then we vilify this and we demonize this industry. But then this one, then we lift up and say, thank you so much for creating these wonder drugs.
That's a level of thought that I have not put into this, and I am just, oh god, yeah. It is definitely let me just see this thing right here. It's Gray Matter Technologies.
Okay.
But you know what? I still think that point of how Walt could use his skills clearly for like the pharmaceutical industry if he wanted to, and get paid for it, is so true. And it's just the character is like, I how do I even put this into words? Let me take a moment because I'm
Sure.
stressed thinking right now because I'm so excited. It's like the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde thing.
Yeah.
That reflection of self for Walt is so constant throughout this like first season where he has to really confront himself to become the evil that he does end up as, and it's just, you know what? I don't think I have a good point about this. I
That's
really
okay.
don't. This is just like you hit it the nail on the head. I don't have anything to add. Like,
All right.
It's perfect. It's perfect.
Thank you.
Yes.
It happens
man.
every now and then.
And you know what? That's probably the last point that I want to bring up. Actually, is for me, this season sets up the necessary logic that the show really goes on for the rest of it.
Yeah.
Is that sense of consequences.
Yeah.
That you're only here based on your choices. Specifically discussing Walt and like his descent into the drug world, is that for the rest of this epic that is Breaking Bad, everything is based on the consequences of Walt's greedy, prideful decisions.
Yes.
And I think it's so well illustrated in that first season, especially like I keep going back to that episode, Gray Matter. I think it's my favorite episode of season one, just because it's so useless till you finish the show. But like it makes it so clear that this man is only finding himself in this situation based on his choices. And that sense of like responsibility that is necessary towards your own choices is put front and center in this first season, that like, hey, you choose to sell your shares, you don't get the big company. You choose to refuse help, then you force yourself to sell drugs. Like, choice ends up influencing Walt's life, and consequences of those choices become the epic that is Breaking Bad. 100%. Right. Oh, so how are you? I am recording a podcast with one of my friends right now.
And you're on it. We heard you banging around.
Yeah, we heard you coming up the stairs, so we started recording again as you were showing up. No, I'm totally kidding. Don't worry about it, man. Yeah, just that sense of consequences, I think, for the first season of Breaking Bad is just absolutely perfect.
Yeah. So one other thing that I wanted to mention, then we'll wrap up, is with one thing that we didn't mention with Jesse, and it's a small little thing, but you get this interesting when Jesse ultimately gets the revelation from Walt that Walt has got cancer. Then Jesse asks informed questions, right? That he knows about this. And then you get this whole little like backstory of he took care of his aunt when she was dying of cancer. And so he knows this. And so that's such an interesting thing to bring up, that Jesse has got insight into this of what Walt is going through and how he wants to know why Walt would all of a sudden start doing this. Why, you know, at like whatever, at like 60 years old, you're just going to break bad.
Yeah.
That he needs to know. And then you find out Jesse does understand what this is like. And it does something that's, I haven't fully worked through this idea, but it's bringing up, we've talked about Jesse and his sickness and the fact that he's an addict. But Walt is also sick, and he's also got an addiction too, right? That Walt is addicted to power and his pride and his ego, but he's also dealing with this sickness of cancer. And that, you know, Jesse, he is a victim of his own addiction and drug issues and all of that. But the way Jesse kind of has got insight into what's going on with Walt, and because of that backstory that is just alluded to, it's so brilliant to do that, because otherwise he would just be a dope who's like,
that is so true. And I think that was in the set of notes that I don't have with me anymore, where I think there was a line where he says something like, oh, you should have told me. That, like, for him, that explains everything, justifies everything, and puts him on the side where uh, that's like where you could almost see the full on. The fact that he's asking it already shows that he is sympathetic towards Walt. That's like where the sympathy for Walt that Jesse will be feeling and supporting throughout the rest of the series as well is like really clearly stated. Where it's like, hey, man, you're going through this. I'm here for you. Like it's a moment of just like kindness out of Jesse.
Yes.
So they've gone through all that shit together at this point in time. That once he understands that, he's like, hey, you're working for like your family here, and I really get that feeling. And I'm not sure if it's actually stated, or if it's stated later, or if it's alluded to. But I think there's some mention about like him taking care of his aunt while he was in high school, right? Is there something like
so.
that?
I'm
Somewhere
pretty
mentioned
sure.
in it? Because I think then that ultimately also reversely informs Walt as to why maybe Jesse wasn't the best student, while he is also still clearly a brilliant person simultaneously.
Yeah.
But like that, this person was going through a whole hardship at home that was completely ignored when he was at
Yeah.
school,
Yeah.
and like that's one thing that I think definitely not one thing that I think I've mentioned it 40 times. The criticism that Breaking Bad is presenting society in general when it's like just showcasing the dynamics between characters and the reasons why they are the way that they are, that justifiable but wrong. Moments like that throughout all of season one just keep showing up where it's justifiable but wrong, justifiable but wrong, justifiable
Yes.
but wrong. His
Yeah.
brother is a
Yeah.
situation like that. The janitor is a situation like that. When he beats up the miners, it's a situation like that. There's so many moments where the show makes sure that you understand that people who find themselves in those situations don't ask for those situations,
Right.
but the decisions that they make once they are in it are oftentimes questionable and need to be like maybe revisited, or they need to be able to make better choices. But there's just so many little moments like that throughout this show, and we missed one of the major ones with Jesse.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, you're right. I love the way you say that. It's justifiable, but it's wrong. And so, yeah, that's so well said. And the thing is, it's interesting that I wonder, because I'm not sure, because it's been a little bit since I watched season one. So I can't remember if Jesse says when this was happening, when he was taking care of his aunt. And like, because I'm so interested in this idea that you brought up, that it's like that kind of explains why he was maybe not doing so well in school, and perhaps explains how he got involved with drugs in the first place.
Yes.
And then the addiction kicks in from there, and it's that he was going through this own personal trauma. And
Yeah, I think there is a mention of something like that somewhere. Maybe not even in that episode, maybe in a later season or something like that.
Mhm.
Because I do remember thinking when I saw that moment in the episode, going like yeah,
Right.
this is why Jesse is the way he
Right.
is. You know?
Yeah. And it's interesting that when Jesse finds out that Walt has got cancer, he's got so much sympathy. And there's multiple times in the series that Jesse has sympathy for Walt, but that sympathy never really goes the other way.
No, really
And
not.
that's where, like, when you described Walt as like a psychopath before, it's like, well, that's an instant of,
Mhm.
You don't have any compassion for this guy at all. You just see him as a tool to be used to accomplish your own ends. That you're not seeing him as a person. You're not recognizing
my
his
goodness.
humanity.
You're right. You know what's crazy is that I think even if it's not mentioned, it might be why it's connected. But like drug addiction and grief. I think you know what? At this point in time, I feel like I'm maybe adding this into my reading of it. But if the thing about it being his aunt, uh, that grieving process led him to drug addiction, the same thing happens with his girlfriend in season two.
Yes.
The grieving process of that leads him to drug addiction. And in season three, when the kid dies and all that,
Yep.
it leads him to drug addiction again. It's like it's clearly like a part of his grieving process that like
Yes.
reoccurs multiple times throughout his
Right.
life, multiple times throughout the series, and within our knowledge. Like it's
Right.
the show.
Yeah. And the way Walt has just got he is so hostile to that. He has no sympathy for the fact that that's how Jesse copes when things are really bad.
Mhm.
But you see that what Walt does to cope when things are really bad, he's like, okay, I'll do this awful, prideful thing,
And I'll tell myself it's for my family.
Yeah, and I'll just justify it exactly and say it's not really about me. It's not selfish, even though it is incredibly selfish, to make himself feel better about himself.
I fucking love this show.
Me too. So this is all right. Let's end it there. And I'm going to some degree, publicly shame you because I want to talk about season 2 with you.
Yeah.
And so now I'm kind of calling you out on it.
Okay.
I know that you've got a busy schedule. I have a busy schedule, but we do have to do this again for season 2 because I absolutely have loved this conversation.
Yeah, me too. This was great.
Okay.
You know what? I think this will put the fire underneath my ass for this. You know what? I'm going to Morocco next month in February, but I come back on the wait. Let me see what day it is.
Well, we can schedule it after. That's fine.
That's exactly it because I know that I have a day off when I come back. And that's I would like to schedule it so that I have a hard date. So I need to finish the show by then. I also need
season 2. You don't have to finish the show, just season 2.
Just season 2, but I would know that there's a day that season 2 needs to be done watched by. That there's a hard date for when we're going to record, and I don't do this thing where I make you wait 3 months for us to have a conversation.
Yeah, this is a little behind the scenes, people. Of we were trying to do this a while ago, and so it's just I don't want to wait. I want to talk to you about Breaking Bad,
dude. Honestly, you know what? So sorry for making you wait so long.
No, that's okay.
This was so much fun. I love this. So yeah. Let me look at this calendar app real quick.
All right. Let me just end the podcast, and then we'll figure it out.
No worries.
All right, folks. Thank you so much for watching. And if we don't get a season 2 podcast within the next little bit here, then start attacking him and let him know that he needs to watch it and he needs to schedule a time to record with me. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Ignore the bell, people. We're gonna keep going. We're still ignoring it. Don't worry. I don't know what that. I think that's the fire drill. All right, we're gonna go home. Yeah, all right, we're done.